Roll, my friends. This is Daily Power Parsha, and this is exciting. It's exciting to be here with you. It's great to study. It's great to have these opportunities to study. This week's Torah portion is Beha'alotecha, and it explores at the beginning, as I mentioned yesterday, it talks about the menorah, the candelabra. Who doesn't love talking about the menorah? The menorah is like, it's light, it's oil, it's fantastic. You know, one thing I wanted to mention yesterday, but I didn't have a way to kind of put it into yesterday's discussion, but I wanted to open with it today, is that when it comes to oil, because again, the reason why I'm mentioning oil is just to clarify, the temple menorah was always lit. Hey, Joy. Was always lit with olive oil, pure olive oil, shemen zayis zach, very pure olive oil from the first pressings. You know, the first squeeze of the olive, if you will. That's why in the story of Hanukkah, remember how they were looking for oil and they only found enough for one day, but it lasted for 8 days. Miracle, we lighted for 8 days. What was the whole thing? They had other oil. They went to Kroger, plenty of oil, plenty of olive oil. But they only had one small bottle that was sealed with the seal of the high priest of the Kohen Gadol, because when they would press the oil, the olive oil for the menorah, it was a special pressing, and it was specially sealed, you know, with a special label. It says this is for the menorah oil, and when it was defiled, that's what created the problem. But getting back, so the temple menorah was always lit with olive oil. There's two things when it comes to oil. There's two contradictory properties. Number one, oil floats. If you mix oil with water, it's not going to mix, right? It's gonna float on top. I've done many a science experiment with kids on this, showing them, demonstrating the floating properties of oil. At the same time, you ever get oil in your clothing? You ever get an oil stain in your clothing? How easily does that come out? Right? Nope, not at all. Oil saturates, right? It does. Right. Oil saturates. So oil has this very complicated personality. If oil was a person, we would tell oil, you're a bit complicated. Like on the one hand, ooh, you're separate, you're not mixing. On the other hand, you're doing a deep dive. We can't even pull you out. No extraction. Oil represents a duality. Number one, separation. Number two, penetration. So what's the message in life? Right? There's got to be a message. So that's oil. So there's no mitzvah just to point out the properties of oil unless you're drawing a lesson from it. So what's the lesson? The lesson is you and I need to have both of these properties in our place within the world, which is a big discussion within Jewish thought. You know, what is our place within the world? What's our role within the world? So on the one hand, we have to know, and by the way, this is not only a Jewish message, this is a message for everybody, right? So on the one hand, you need to have a little bit of separation, right? You don't need to get caught up in all of the, in Hebrew they would say shtuyot. Shtuyot means foolishness, all of the, craziness of the world. It's not healthy to get mixed into the fray always. Just because everyone's talking about it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to have it on our heads, right? Just because this latest scandal and that actor and that musician, whatever. We don't have to get so caught up in things that are not that important. So on the one hand, and I'm giving several examples, but whatever. Just on the one hand, it's good to have separation. Like oil, you can float above. You don't need to get involved in the fray or get involved in all of the stuff that brings people down. Sometimes you can go up. You can go higher. You can float higher a little bit. On the one hand. On the other hand, we have a responsibility to make a difference in the world. We have to have an impact on the world. We can't float so high above that we become aloof and completely uninterested or disinterested in the goings-on of the world around us. On the contrary, we have to be like the other property of oil, which is the penetrative quality, the quality of saturating, of impacting in a way that can't take out that impact something in a way that's irreversible, in a good way, by the way. I don't mean in a negative way, God forbid, but in a good way, make your impact heard. So, on the one hand, float. On the other hand, penetrate. So that's regarding oil, and again, getting back to the menorah. Let's jump into, so as we continue looking through the themes of the Torah portion, I want to share with you the next piece of the narrative, which is about the Levites. We read a few weeks ago, or maybe several weeks ago, about the inauguration of the priests, of the Kohanim. And that was done by Moses. Moses brought sacrifices, and he brought offerings, and he trained the Kohanim, he trained the priests for 7 days. And until the opening day, which is the day that the tragedy happened, that the two older sons of Aaron, the two older next generation Kohanim, Nadav and Avihu, died. That was also the day of the inauguration of the first opening day of the Mishkan, and the first of the 12 tribes brought their offering, like we read in last week's Torah portion. But either way, the point is that the Kohanim, the priests, were inaugurated. Well, what about the Levites? Did the Levites have a similar inauguration? Was there any sort of training that happened? What was going on with the Levites? So I'm going to share my screen, and let's jump in. Let's read Beha'alotecha. Now, I want to start with the second reading, which corresponds to Monday, which is yesterday, but we didn't do it yesterday, so it's never too late, which, by the way, is going to be a theme that I want to share with you a little bit later, the idea of it's never too late. Take a look at the opening verse, Numbers chapter 8, verse number 15. Following this, hold on, maybe I should go back, because this is introduced in the first reading. Okay, we're going back even to the first reading. Okay, take a look. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the Levites from among the children of Israel and cleanse them." So it's about cleansing water over them, passing a razor over their flesh, washing their garments, cleansing themselves, basically a mikvah situation. And then they bring certain offerings. The Levites are considered to be a wave offering even. They themselves are being offered, in a sense, or uplifted. Okay, so the bottom line is, this is the way in which there's a process, a ritual by which the Levites were inaugurated into the holy service. The second reading continues this. And I want to read these first two verses, again, verses 15 and 16 of Numbers chapter 8. Following this, which is kind of the preparation ritual, the Levites shall come to serve in the tent of meeting. The implication is, by the way, that you can't serve until you have your basic training. And your basic training is what I just glossed over, but the previous verses. Okay, you shall cleanse them and lift them as a waving. That's your cliff notes of what has to happen. There's a cleansing, a mikvah process, and a waving process. Next, why do they have to go through this process? For they are wholly given over to me from among the children of Israel. Instead of those that open the womb, all the firstborn of Israel, I have taken them for myself. Once again, God points out that it was supposed to be the firstborn. It was supposed to be the firstborn. From the moment of the Exodus, the firstborn were chosen to be the ones to serve God. They messed it up. Sin of the golden calf. Who didn't sin? The Levites. The Levites take the place. We read a few weeks ago about how there was a pidyon, an actual redemption, a one-for-one redemption, firstborn for Levite, or Levite for firstborn. But once again, God mentions that the Levites are dedicated to God's service instead of the ones that open the womb, which are the firstborn. Open the womb is basically euphemism for the firstborn of the mother's firstborn, and those should have been the ones to serve, but instead it's the Levites. I want to focus on this phrase right here. Look at this. I'm going to highlight it in the English, and I'll mention the words wholly given over. These words, wholly. Let me try that again. Can't get it to highlight. Wholly given over, which means completely or entirely dedicated, entirely given over. What is the Hebrew? The Hebrew is a little bit different. Nisunim and nisunim. Nisunim is related to the word nasan or natan or matana. You know what that means? To give, or it's a gift. So really what the Torah is saying, if you forget the English for a second, just the Hebrew, the verse says, why do all these things? Ki, because, nitunim hemali. given over they are to me. In other words, they're dedicated. In the English it does say given over, but it says it twice in the Hebrew. Nisunim, nisunim, or nitunim, nitunim. Given over, given over. That's why in the English it says wholly given over, or entirely given over, to explain the double expression. But not so fast. Because Rashi explains that there's another meaning behind the double expression, given over, given over. Take a look at Rashi. I just toggled it on your screen. Wholly given over, Hebrew nisunim, nisunim, the double expression denoting given over for the service of carrying and given over for the singing in the temple. This is coming from the Midrash Agada. But again, let's keep our eye on the prize here for a second. They were given over for two things, Rashi says. They were given over for carrying and given over for the singing. Carrying, in other words, moving, transporting, schlepping the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and for singing, accompanying the service in the temple that the priests, the Kohanim, did. The Levites would accompany it with music. There was instrumental, there was vocal, they sang with their mouths, they played instruments, there was a concert, a concerto. I don't know what a concerto is. Maybe it means concert, maybe it means something else, but we're going to go with the Italian-sounding word. There was a concerto that accompanied the Mishkan, the tabernacle service, each and every day. If you were bringing a sacrifice, you would have the sacrificial part of it with the Kohanim, and the Levites were standing there, playing music in the temple. That's what was going on. A marvelous sight. You can only imagine what it was like to actually be there. So Rashi says, what does God mean when God says that the Levites are nisunim, nisunim, given over? Because they had two jobs. They were given over, number one, for schlepping, carrying, and number two, they were given over for singing. So I'm going to reference what I said last week. You know what? I don't mind sharing a similar thought today because I believe it's so important. And I think we can review this every single day because it's so important. There's carrying and there's singing. You can imagine how the Levites felt with that position of prominence. They were the choir masters. They were the concert players. They were in the orchestra. There was a maestro, a conductor, and it probably felt good. That job probably felt good to sing in the temple. But what about the carrying? Carrying might have felt like a drag, right? Like a schlep. Oh yeah, gotta pack up all this stuff and then unpack it and carry it on my shoulders or put it on a wagon, load and unload. This is not glorious. The singing is glorious, but not the carrying. Once again, the Torah reminds us, nisunim, nisunim. Life is always going to be a combination. Life is always going to be a combination of the things that we like doing and the things that we don't like doing. There's going to be the singing parts and the carrying parts. There's the music and the schlepping. That's life. So here's the question. Will you accept both with arms wide open, or are you going to pick and choose? I only want this, I don't want that. I don't want that. In life, the stuff that we do, some of it is pleasant and some of it not so pleasant. Does that make it any less valuable? No. It's just as valuable. And Rashi puts that one before the singing. Rashi first says, Nusinim lamasa, Nusinim lashir. First of all, first and foremost, the carrying. And secondarily, for the singing. Even though you might have said, or they might have said, well, we enjoyed the singing part, the carrying part, not so much. It's one of the, you got to do what you got to do. Nonetheless, Rashi puts it first. Because at the end of the day, oftentimes, our purpose in life is realized in those spaces that are a little bit more difficult. The spaces, the activities that we might not have chosen for ourselves, but that life chose for us, or God chose for us. It's in those spaces that our true purpose oftentimes is realized. So, it's good to sing, and it's good to enjoy what you do, but it's also good to carry, even when you don't want to. It's good to do the things that you don't want to, that we don't want to, because that's what builds character, right? As the cliche goes. But it's also what oftentimes speaks to our mission. We don't write our own script. When I say we don't write our own script, we didn't choose to be born, and we didn't give ourselves the mission that we have. That was given to us. And along with that, we have a burden to carry. Not in a negative way, but in a positive way. Like I said last week, you can either look at that as carrying stones or carrying diamonds. That's a choice. Which brings me to the second explanation in this Rashi. Not only that that life is comprised of two different burdens, or two different services. The services that we love, and the ones that maybe we don't love so much. Not only that, but with the proper perspective, you and I can transform the caring to singing. Singing in the rain, right? It might be raining, it might be pouring, we might be schlepping, but you know what? This is what I got. I'm singing. I'm joyous. I'm excited. This is my calling. Okay, that's that. Let's continue. I'm going to toggle Rashi off just so that it's a little bit easier to scroll through. Once again, it's mentioned. Yeah. Firstborn should have been mine, but God says, I've taken the Levites instead of the firstborn. Okay, I think that point is made abundantly clear. Once again, we have the Levites working from the age of 25 and up, 25 to 50. 50 is the age of retirement for the Levite. Not bad. Maybe there was a pension. Okay, now let's jump to the third reading, because this is today's reading. There's a lot to speak about today. We'll do one or two quick insights. All right, this is the discussion of what we know today as Pesach Sheni, which is the second Passover offering. But it wasn't always Pesach Sheni, and I'll tell you what I mean. So the Torah talks about what happened. We had a Torah studies class on this a few weeks ago, but I'm going to share a little bit of a different insight, or different insights today. You know what? Let me read this inside, and then I'll comment on it. Numbers chapter 9, verse number 1. The Lord spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in the second year of their exodus from the land of Egypt, which means basically 1 year later. So if Exodus is year 1, then this is year 2, so it's a year later. This was in the first month, so it's the month of Nisan. So it's almost the first anniversary, 15 days shy of that first anniversary. This is what God says. The children of Israel shall make the Passover sacrifice in its appointed time. In 2 weeks, I want you to make this sacrifice on the first anniversary. On the afternoon of the 14th of this month, you shall make it, the sacrifice, the Paschal lamb, in its appointed time, in accordance with all the statutes and all its ordinances you shall make it. In other words, all the stuff that I told you last year when you were still in Egypt about the Paschal offering, do the same thing 1 year later on the anniversary. And so that's what God told Moses. Moses, of course, the faithful communicator, then relays the message to the people. Moses, verse 4, Moses spoke to the children of Israel, instructing them to make the Passover sacrifice. So they did it. Verse 5, so they made the Passover sacrifice in the first month, on the afternoon of the 14th day of the month in the Sinai desert, according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so did the children of Israel do. So God told Moses, Moses told the people, and they did it. Great story, but not so fast. Let's continue. There were men who were ritually unclean because of contact with a dead person. So here's a little bit of a snag in the plan. There were some people who were impure, and therefore they could not make the Passover sacrifice on that day. So they approached Moses and Aaron on that day. Remember, they didn't have a lot of warning. It's kind of like the programming that we do sometimes, which is you got to find out, and it's quick turnaround here, right? It's like you got a week or two of notice if you're lucky, and then that's it. We're rocking and rolling. So they got 2 weeks notice about this Passover offering. So there were people that were ritually unclean, and they simply didn't have enough time to become purified. By the way, to get purified from coming in contact with a dead body, back in the day when you had a tabernacle or a temple, required the red heifer. And that's a complicated procedure. You have to find the perfectly red heifer, perfect, all red hairs, not even 2 black hairs. That's already disqualification. And you have to prepare it a certain way and sprinkle it a certain way on the person. It's a very complicated procedure. They didn't have enough time to do it. So here you have these people, this small group of individuals that were ritually impure, and they go to Moses and Aaron, and they do the famous Jewish thing. They complain. Take a look, but in a good way. But they complain. Verse 7. Those men said to him, well, I guess to Moses, we are ritually unclean because of contact with a dead person, but why should we be excluded so as not to bring the offering of the Lord in its appointed time with all the children of Israel? We don't want to be left out, essentially they said. Moses said to them, wait, give me a minute, and I will hear what the Lord instructs concerning you. Basically, he says, good question. Let me take it up with the boss. Okay, and here's the response. Verse number 9. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, saying. So basically tell the people as follows. Any person who becomes unclean from contact with the dead or is on a distant journey, whether among you or in your future generations, whether now or for all time, he shall make a Passover sacrifice for the Lord when, here we go, in the second month, on the 14th day in the afternoon, they shall make it. They shall eat it with unleavened cakes and bitter herbs. In other words, if you can't do it in its appointed time, which is the 14th day of Nisan, do it the 14th day of Iyar, which is the next month. 30 days later. You have a 30-day later opportunity to do the offering. Now, in the original story, it was because people didn't have enough time, enough notice. For future generations, though, you know the date on the calendar, so why can't you be ready? Why can't you be ritually pure? Simple answer. You might be thinking this question, simple answer. What happens if you weren't planning on somebody passing away, but that person suddenly passes away, and you're in proximity to them and under the same roof? That's it. I mean, not you. When I say you, I don't mean you. God, no one should experience loss, but imagine a person, right, is in proximity, wasn't planning on it, wasn't planning on somebody passing away in their proximity. It happens. That's it. So God is now giving that person a chance. Yeah, let's say it happens a day before. You're supposed to, okay, so don't bring it. You're ritually impure. Take the time, go through the process. A month later, you have enough time. A month later, you'll do it then. Somebody's traveling, emergency need to travel. Overseas, not near the temple or tabernacle. By the way, this is, I should mention, you can't just put up your own altar in your backyard and start bringing sacrifices. It's not like, there's no at-home kit for the sacrificial service. You had to show up in the temple or the Mishkan or the tabernacle. You had to be in that place to do it. So what if somebody is traveling or whatever, can't get back in time? Okay, 1 month later. Let's continue reading. Oh, 1 second. Let me read verse 11 again. So in the second month, on the 14th day, which is 1 month later, in the afternoon they shall make it, they shall eat it, listen to this, with unleavened cakes and bitter herbs. You do the whole matzah and maror also. How cool is that? It's a month later. It's not Pesach anymore, by the way. It's not, Passover is done. But you didn't do the offering, or the person didn't do the offering, so what do? A month later, you got a mini Passover experience. You have your lamb, your paschal lamb, you have your unleavened cakes. That makes matzah sound so much better than it tastes. I'm just saying, unleavened cakes. It's like, wow, I want some cake, unleavened cake. But, okay, that's matzah. And the bitter herbs. So you're supposed to have the trifecta there. Just to mention, you're allowed to have chametz on that day also. So you don't have to get rid of your chametz. It's not like Passover. You're just doing certain elements of the Passover experience. So you can have, listen to this, it's crazy. You can have at this meal your paschal lamb, your matzah and your maror, that the Torah says, along with challah and French toast and pancakes and waffles and bagels. Well, I was going to say pizza, but that's meat and milk. So, okay, hold the pizza. But you can have, basically, you can go crazy with different types of foods because it's not Passover. You're just doing a few elements of that, but it's not actually Passover. All right, and then the Torah continues to give the details of that process. You eat it that night, the night of Passover. Don't leave over anything, verse 12, to the next morning. By the way, why not? We want to be free, right? We want to be free and live like, free people. So make sure you eat all of it. Don't break any of its bones, the Torah says. You know why? Because someone who's impoverished, who's hungry, will break the bones and suck out the marrow and eat every single part of the food. Whereas when you're a little bit more well off, so to speak, then you don't need to break the bones. You're good with the meat itself. So again, it's a perspective on Passover, or even the second Passover, second opportunity. We're supposed to be free, living free and lavish. Okay, and let's look at verse 13, though. This is important. But if the man who was ritually clean was not on a journey, yet refrained from making the Passover sacrifice, if a person chose just not to do it, like, no, I'm here, I'm fine, I'm kosher, I'm ritually clean, but you know what? I don't want to do it. That person does not have then we don't give you a second chance. Then, I mean, that was like an intentional, dis, if you will, of Passover. So it says his soul shall be cut off from his people. In other words, it's a spiritual grievance. For he did not bring the offering of the Lord in its appointed time, that person shall bear his sin. Okay. Verse 14 talks about the proselyte who dwells with you should also do the Passover sacrifice. All right, that's the discussion. I want to share with you the Hasidic understanding of this whole story, or the Hasidic takeaway. A few takeaways. Number one, Zenishta Kain Farfalin, which is Yiddish for it's never too late. I know we just read about the person and we said it is too late, but let's forget about that person for a second. In the first scenarios, right? In the first scenarios, yeah, you wanted to, you had good intentions, you're ritually impure. You wanted to, good intentions, you were overseas, you weren't around, you weren't able to do it. The Torah says, God says, don't worry, I'm giving you a second chance. Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, teaches us that Senishta Kain Farfalin, it's never too late. You always have a second chance. God always gives a second chance. So we shouldn't be despondent. And by the way, you might apply this in many different areas in life, like a relationship. Let's say a relationship. Maybe we haven't talked to someone in a little while and we feel, whatever. Maybe that relationship is, we've written off. Torah says, Nishta Kain Farfalin, it's never too late. Have a relationship Sheni, Pesach Sheni, second Passover. Have a relationship Sheni, a second opportunity for the relationship, right? If it's worthwhile, reach out to the other, right? Extend the olive branch, whatever, break the ice. It's one example. Many different examples of oftentimes human beings look at things like, oh, it's too late, like I can't, but that often is an artificial construct that we just decided we can't, or it's too late. God says, maybe not, you have another chance, go for it, open the door. The second takeaway, and this will be the final thing I want to mention today, the second takeaway is about perseverance. You see, the individuals who were impure could have simply said, oh well, what are you going to do? Oh well, we wanted to, but we're impure. You know how, according to, there's a few different traditions as to why they were impure in the first place. Some say that they were impure because they were carrying the bones of Joseph. Joseph passed away in Egypt, and he told his family, when you leave, take me with you. And so they took him, they carried Joseph's coffin the 40 years in the desert and buried him in the Holy Land in Israel when they arrived in Israel 40 years later. So the people that were holding the coffin were coming in contact with the remains of a human being, of a human body. That's why they were impure. They could have said, hey, we're doing a mitzvah. We're doing a mitzvah carrying, honoring Joseph's remains. So, oh well, we can't do this sacrifice, but it's not like we're not doing good deeds. We're doing many good deeds. So they could have shrugged their shoulders and moved on, and they would have been completely justified. And Torah would have fully accepted that. Look, the way halacha works, the way Jewish law works, if you can do it, you do it. If you can't, well, what are you going to do? And yet, they weren't satisfied with their good excuse. And it was a good excuse. But they weren't satisfied with their excuse. And they pushed, and they told Moshe, Lamani Gara, why should we be held back? Or why should this not apply to us? We want to do this as well. They pushed. And you know what? The door opened. And that's also a message in life. Message number one was, there's always a second chance. But I think message number two is maybe even more radical, and that is, you and I can push against the system and change the system. You and I can push against even the divine system. God created a system. This mitzvah wasn't there before they pushed. They pushed and God said, you know what? Let's create this mitzvah. You want to call it number 613? Go ahead. There's 613 mitzvot. Maybe 612 were pre-planned. This one came as a response to human initiative. And that's incredible. In this world, there are many things that there are many things that aren't ideal the way they are. Two options. Shrug your shoulders and say, what are you going to do? Or push against it and make the change. Again, what area am I talking about? Whatever area you want. Whatever this means to you, that's what I mean. But you know in your own life, and you know in your own community and own society what that means for you. The things that you could, and you might be justified to say, what are you going to do? This is it. This is the reality. I didn't create the reality. These are the rules. This is the system. Right? What are you going to do? And you're justified to say that. But take the message, take the inspiration of today's reading, of these individuals, these brave souls. I don't know, brave. Maybe that's the wrong word. These non-complacent souls who looked around and said, we don't like this. We don't like this narrative. We don't like this script. Our script says that we don't do this sacrifice. No, not good enough. They pushed and they got it. Let's push for the change that we want to see in our world. And please God, God will open up the door and make that change happen. But God sometimes waits for us. God could have preemptively, because God knows what's going to happen also, right? God could have preemptively given Pesach Sheni, but God specifically waited for the ask. That's also a lesson, right? God can fix the problems, but God wants us to take the initiative. So let's take the initiative, and let's do what we can to fix and correct the areas that need to be corrected, to open the doors that need to be opened, and please God, God will bless our efforts and crown them with success. Thank you for joining me today for another